Afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this warm, sunny Tuesday afternoon where we've got a special Foundations Live all about universal design. Good afternoon, I'm Paul from Foundations. We're the national body for home improvement agencies and the Disabled Facilities Grant in England. And we're funded by the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Governments. If you need any help with anything DFG or home improvement agency related, then please do get in touch. I thought as we quite often do now, we'd have a little poll to get us started so you can get used to using the chat. So where are you watching us from today? Put 1 in the chat if you're at home, 2 in the chat if you're in the office, or 3 for somewhere else. So let's see where everyone's watching us from today. I'm guessing mostly at home. So mostly at home. If you're new to these, usually at the start I do ask what the weather's like, but probably wasn't much point in that today. It's either hot or very hot. So thank you all for participating in the poll, and we'll know where the comments are now. So as we go through this afternoon's sessions, then always a chance to ask questions to our speakers. So a couple of other bits and pieces just before we get started. We will be holding our summer conference, the Home Adaptations in Social Housing Conference, next Wednesday. There are just a handful of tickets left, so if you want to join us in Manchester next Wednesday, then we'd love to see you there. We'll be going through a whole range of issues around home adaptations in social housing. And if you're responsible for managing your local disabled facilities grant program, hopefully you've either seen the letter from government or you've been contacted by ourselves about the potential for underspends to be both reported and potentially reclaimed this year if you haven't spent all your funding. So if you need any help and assistance with making sure you can spend as much as possible and minimizing any risk of that happening, then please do get in touch with us. Right, as I said, today is all about universal design. So we're joined in a little while by Shane Elliott from Northern Ireland Housing Executive, who have published a new guide on universal design for cognitive and sensory impairments, and also be joined later this afternoon by Michael Reeve, who works in the NHS in Leicestershire, and some of his views around universal design as well. But first of all, Foundations Live! I'm very pleased to be joined this afternoon live from Sweden by Per-Olof Hedvall, or Pio, as introduce him. Is professor at it's Lund University in Sweden.
It's Mid-Sweden University. So.
Yes, and I've started. Well, I kind of came across Per-Olof on LinkedIn, and he's done some fantastic articles, I think, that explain what universal design is and how it can be implemented and used as I suppose, as just a general way of designing things better. But I think he will explain it much better than I'm doing. So I'll hand over to Pio to take us through his creating a society beyond us and them.
Perfect. Thanks, Paul, and thanks for the nice introduction. My name is Pio Hedvall, and I work as a professor in design at Mid-Sweden University. And what I'm going to talk about today is, as Paul said, it's all about universal design and how to create a society beyond us and them. Because that's something that I work a lot with, that we have a society where we have a strong established norm, and then those who are understood as deviating from the norm. And that creates an us and the them, and that we see popping up in buildings, in policy frameworks, in graphics, etc. So I'm going to give some examples from our research, but also tell a bit from my own life and situations that I've been part of. I've been using a wheelchair for more than 35 years now. So I often use situations that I've been part of when I talk about accessibility, usability, and universal design. So we'll start with a personal story to introduce universal design. And from there, I will move on to discuss categorization and norm and deviation, and how those create us and them in different contexts. And we're discussing universal design as part of developing culture. On the screen now, there's a photograph that I took in Italy at a conference a couple of years ago. It's a toilet door with a wheelchair sign where someone has peeled off the wheel, so it's just a sitting person left. And I got interested in that, and I wish I was there when the person took away the wheel. I would have liked to ask that person why they did it, and what their thoughts behind it was. This wheelchair sign is something that we see all around society, but sometimes it's a bit double-edged. While it signals trust and care, it also highlights certain individuals, and this is something that I work with in our research. But let's start with a situation that I've been part of. On the screen now, there's a photograph from a brand new building in the city of Lund in Sweden. And I'm visiting the building for the first time. I've just entered the building, and when I enter the building, I'm greeted by a large landscape, a staircase that is sort of at the center of the building. And then tucked away in the corner to the left, that's where the elevators are. And when I entered this building, I was going to the third floor, since I was about to teach occupational therapy students about universal design. So I needed to find an elevator. But when I saw this, when I saw this building and when I experienced it, I recognized it, since it's something that I've been seeing many times before. And it's almost like a trend right now to build buildings around land, so-called social staircases, where people are supposed to mingle, have their lunches, etc. But it also creates an established norm, and it centers around those who can use the staircase. And while the elevators are often tucked away in much darker corners. So there's a norm, and then there's those deviating from the norm, and which are the ones who need to find an elevator. And one main reason why I like to work with universal design as a design approach is that from a universal design point of view, there is only one population. And in that population, there are variations and differences in vast richness of humanity. But we don't have a normal population, and then those deviating from that. From a universal design point of view, there's only one population. And everything that we create as human beings becomes part of its time. And it's sort of the zeitgeist, the values that rubs off on what we create. So in this case, this building It has embedded values such as attitudes, norms, expectations. Who are expected, who are not, who's supposed to do, expected to do what in different situations. And this is the way I see design as a whole, that it's not just something that is external from you that you can knock on, and it is part of something that you experience. It is part of your, an integral part of your life. On the screen now, there's a child leaning out of a train car. And when she was born, there's much of society's and its design that she hadn't met yet. But as she grows up and rubs against society and grows into society, society also grows into her. Take the alphabet, for instance. When she was born, she hadn't met the alphabet. But the alphabet is an artifact. It's something that is designed. It is something that can look different in different cultures. But as she grows up, many children learn to read and write and start to contribute to society in that way as well. And as part of that process, the alphabet sort of grows into the person as well. So this is how I see design. It is part of us. It is just, and it's shaping who we can be, who we can become, and what stories about us that society support. So I often talk about the individual in the society, but also the society in the individual. And this connects to universal design. On the screen now is my favorite quote regarding universal design. And it is from the very start, when universal design started to grow, by Ron Mace, who was an architect who coined the universal design term. And he used it publicly first in an interior design magazine back in 1985. This is not from the magazine, but this is from an occasion where he spoke, I think. And on the screen now, there's a quote saying, "Universal design is ultimately about changing attitudes throughout society, emphasizing democracy, equity, and citizenship. Universal design denotes a process more than a definite result." And the reason why I like this quote is because it isn't about ramps or slopes or contrast levels on web pages, etc. It is about democracy, equity, citizenship, attitudes. It is about societal change. And that's the way I see universal design, that it is ultimately about societal change. There are two main ideas that I come back to almost daily when it comes to universal design. And that is equity and flexibility. That's also the first and second principle of universal design. But that's not the main reason. I think that these two keywords are the two most important for universal design. So equitable use is about treating people with dignity, to not put people in vulnerable positions or to treat people as different. On the screen now, there are two photographs. On the top, there's two persons leaving a shopping mall. One is standing and one is sitting down. And there's an inbuilt flexibility in that door opener. It is aware that people are of different heights. Everyone has a height, but it's different. And that's the assumption behind that door opening mechanism. You don't have to be 1.82 meters to be let out. And we have a lot of flexibility in society. In most cases, we don't call it universal design. And that's just fine, I think. But say, for instance, there's also a photograph of an electric desk that can go up and down. And why do we need to have electric desks that can change in height? Well, because everyone has a height, but it's different. But also maybe we want to change position during the day, or depending on what activities we're involved in. And if we connect these two ideas, equity and flexibility, we get that flexibility opens up for diversity. But when you hear the term universal design, it sort of leads the mind to thinking about one size fits all. But it is actually totally the other way around, that we need flexibility. There is a variation in society, and there is a variation between humans, both single individuals, but also between each other. And the only reasonable response to that variation is to meet that with variation. So I often say that flexible use is about meeting variation with variation. In Sweden, universal design has been part of policy in different flavors for almost, say, about 20 years now. But the term universal design got a much stronger foothold after we ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. But then it took about 10 years before the term universal design was actually became part of the Swedish policy frameworks. So on the screen now, there are two examples of Swedish policy frameworks. One is the National Disability Policy, which is about full participation, equitable living conditions, and so on. That's the national goal. But then there are 4 focus fields, or 4 focus areas. And the first one was for everything new, base it on universal design. And for the existing, continue to improve accessibility. And then the third one is about individual support. Even in the most open and inclusive society that I can think about, I will still need some way to move about in society. And there isn't a contradiction between universal design and individual support. We are going to need that anyway, always going to need that, some separate solutions. And the fourth point is to prevent discrimination at all times. So this was a national disability policy, but we also have a national policy for the design living environments. That's the national design and architecture policy framework, and also in there, which is much more general. It's about all architecture, all design. It says and promotes a systematic application of universal design. So just 2 examples of one from within the field of disability and one from outside of the field of disability. So in Sweden, we have 3 terms that we use when it comes to what creates the conditions for participation, who can go where, who can do what in what situations, contribute to what in society. And those 3 are accessibility, usability, and universal design. And even though each of them are important, I would say that the totality that the 3 create together is the most important. Sometimes there can be a bit of confusion between, so what's universal design and what's accessibility? And I think the most important thing is that we capture what's important, and not the exact term that we use for it. But here's how we define it in Sweden: that accessibility, that's the term that we've had for the longest time. It is about access. It is a measurable concept. And we have it as part of the national building legislation, for instance. And on the screen now, there are 3 bubbles where accessibility is the smallest one. And outside of that accessibility bubble, there's another bubble saying usability, which traditionally has 3 focus points. effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction. And that's the individual's or group's point of view. So if accessibility is more of an objective term, usability is more subjective. That's the individual's perspective. And now in the more recent years, we've added a third, the largest bubble, universal design, with a focus on equity and equality, non-stigmatization, so to avoid putting people in harm or harmful situations, or treating people as separate, and intersectionality, that the person is so much more than just how much they can happen to hear or see or can move about. And those three together, they create the conditions for participation. So let's take this model and use it on a concrete example. So here's a photo that I took a Thursday afternoon 2 years ago. It's on a train in the northern parts of Sweden. I have just embarked on a 2.5 hour train journey. And when I entered, it was a modern train, fairly new. I could roll in. There was level access to get in. I took left around a large toilet. So there was a large toilet. And behind that toilet, there was a space with a wheelchair sign where I was supposed to sit. And this is where I've taken the photograph inwards towards the train car. And where I sit, there's also a bicycle. There's a child sleeping in a pram. And there are some seats, but they are blocked by the bicycle. And then further into the car, there are comfortable seats with tables and power outlets, etc. So there's quite a stark contrast between the two compartments. And this is a situation that I like. I love to talk with our design students about. And I often ask them my favorite question, which is, what do you notice in this situation? And quite often they say that it feels like you're sitting in the luggage compartment. And yeah, well, that was part of my experience. Something made me raise my cell phone and take this photograph. And it was the division between what is so-called normal passenger and the ones using the space where I'm sitting. I had planned to work during the train ride, but since it was expected to take 2.5 hours, but I didn't have a table and I didn't have a power outlet, so I couldn't work. So what if we take the 3 rings with accessibility, usability, and universal design and apply it on this situation? So what about accessibility? Well, I would say that this train car meets a lot of formal accessibility requirements. There was a level access, there was a large toilet, there was a space for me to sit. So I would say that from a pure accessibility point of view, it meets a lot of criteria. But what about usability? My lived perspective. Was it effective, efficient? Was I satisfied? Well, I wasn't particularly satisfied, and I couldn't do what I had planned to do. So usability, no, very poor usability, I would say. And what about universal design? What about equity and stigmatization and intersectionality? Well, I think it's quite clear that universal design hadn't at all been part of this design process. It is quite easy to see that you could have come up with a much more flexible layout of the train car if you have had universal design as a starting point. But there's a very strong us and them in this situation. So no universal design. So this is the way, and this is why all 3 terms are important to have, because they all 3 capture different things. So when we work with universal design, we're trying to understand and bring in and work together with, as then tease out variation in all its flavors. On the screen now, there's a bell curve, a population curve, where most people are in the middle, and then some people are at the outer edges of that curve. And there it says some people, and there's a vertical line denoting that some people are present and some are not. And among those who are not, I think it's always interesting to ask who doesn't work here, who doesn't study here, who doesn't eat here. So who have we left behind? We can learn a lot about participation from that point of view, but also who is present, but perhaps struggles a bit to be present. We can learn a lot about participation from that point of view as well. So I think those two foci are important. Who is left behind and who is present, but just barely. And when working with universal design, it is about understanding as much as possible and having that as part of the design process, as about variation. Sometimes it's called extreme users or extreme situations. I think extreme users is perhaps a term that I don't use that often, since it depicts the users as being extreme. But I often talk about extreme situations instead. So, well, one other thing that is good to have in mind when working with universal design is categorizations. And that's something that we do a lot of research on. So why categorizations? And what we use categorization as a verb rather than category to emphasize that they are active processes. That categorizations are always done to someone, by someone. And since it's done to someone, by someone, it also values certain perspectives and silences others. And gives advantages and disadvantages to people. But this is often done in an invisible way. So in our research, we ask questions like, how do categorizations operate? What do they create in terms of stigma and inequality? And who is understood to be part of all? That's just an example of questions that are on categorizations. So a couple of concrete examples of how we work with categorizations. Well, first of all, when I move about in society, I'm used to being put in the category of someone using a wheelchair, a disabled person, or a person with a disability, but depending on what language we use. On the screen now, there are 3 photographs. From one is a photograph from an airport in Italy, one airport in Spain, and one ferry to a Danish island. And all 3 of those signs in the photographs carry wheelchair signs, but none of them use the standard wheelchair sign. So for instance, there's a seaman in a wheelchair on the ferry. But this is an example of how categorizations they flavor one situation and color the next one as well. So on the screen now, there are two photographs of 2 toilet doors. One thing that we've done in our research is to ask citizens to send us photographs of situations where they feel that they belong or where they are alienated or feel experienced as being excluded. And a surprising amount of those have been on toilet doors. So on the screen now, there are 2 such photos of toilet doors. To the left, there are 3 pictograms on a toilet door: a person in a wheelchair, a family consisting of a child, mom and dad, and then there's a standing person changing diaper on a baby. So what happens here in terms of categorization? Well, they tell about which persons or which roles or what bodies, who is expected to use this room. To the right, there's another type of pictogram, also a toilet door, but with a water closet and 2 handrails. So that one doesn't say anything about who this room is for. It tells about what kind of room is it, and maybe what are the facilities, and what is the layout of this room. Is it a broom closet or is it a toilet? And if so, what functionality is in that room? So here's a shift from left to right. So this is one of the patterns that we've found in our research, that when we go from telling who is this for, to function or layout or situation instead, and we call that pattern from person to function. Another example is to go from norm and deviation, which I've talked about a lot in this presentation, to variation. On the screen now, again, 2 photographs. To the left is a photograph of an entrance to a coffee shop it's from a fairly new built area in the city of Gothenburg in Sweden. And there's a difference in height, say 12, 15 centimeters to get into the coffee shop. And they've solved that with 1 step and a very long ramp that you have to go around if you come with a pram or if you use a wheelchair or deliver a package or whatever. So it creates an totally unnecessary us and them in this situation, because it's not fully visible in the photograph, but there's plenty of space outside, and they could have worked with just the paving and raised the paving a bit, and then they would then they wouldn't have had this ramp or this step. But this is how we are primed to do things. First, we solve things for the norm, and then we handle the deviations separately. So when I saw this photograph the first time, I thought that, okay, so here's the norm and deviation pattern that has struck again. But to the right, there's a very simple example of how to meet variation with variation. It's a bench in the city of Kalmar in Sweden. The bench, as I said, is a very simple example, but the bench has cutouts in the seat. It has seats with armrests and backrests, and seats without. So there's a variation in seating options. And so this is, to me, a better example when it comes to meet variation with variation. And so how to meet human variation with seating variation in this instance. So I hope that through the force of universal design and the growth of universal design, that we are a part of experiences shifting in culture. And one thing that I think is important to establish and contribute to that shift is to not only talk about tools and methods, but we also need to think about processes, mindsets, and culture. So on the screen now, there's another figure with 5 circles on top of each other. The smallest one, the innermost, it says tools, but those tools are part of the next circle, methods. And those methods, they are part of the next circle, processes. But what about the processes? Well, they are part of mindset. And the mindset, what allows the mindset to grow and change and transform over time? Well, that's the outermost circle, the culture. And this is my hope for universal design, that it can contribute to a future that is better at meeting variation with variation, and not relying as much on us and them thinking. So the main takeaways from this short presentation is that universal design means treating people with dignity, equity, meeting variation with variation, flexibility, and that all three terms, accessibility, usability, and universal design, are needed, since they capture different things, and one can't replace the other. And that we need to move beyond thought patterns based on norm and deviation, and instead of by exploring a shift in categorization. So how we categorize, explore a shift in categorization beyond us and them. Here are some references to some of the things that I've talked about. And also, as Paul said, I have a newsletter on LinkedIn where I try to write short essays or articles about situations that I've been part of and analyze them from universal design point of view. And it can be other things, but it is mostly about universal design. So thank you.
Thank you for that. I think I'm sure that was a kind of really interesting, different way to think about kind of how to design the world, I think, isn't it? And have you done any work with? 'Cause I think a lot of those examples were kind of public infrastructure and obviously kind of trains and kind of public buildings. Have you done any work on kind of housing in Sweden or kind of more widely, and some of your thoughts maybe on how homes could kind of feature some of these kind of principles and be kind of more usable and kind of universal design as well?
Well, I think the mindset that I'm talking about, I think that is just as relevant when it comes to home as well, homes as well. Then homes can be so different. I mean, if it's a student apartment where people move in and out frequently, or then an increased flexibility, where you can sort of shift from one person to the next. It becomes quite natural that each person that moves into a student apartment will perhaps have different demands. But if I take the Swedish situation, I would say that if I try to find a home, say that I am getting a job at a new university and I'm about to move, then there's only a smaller portion of the homes that are available to me and my family to move into. So the way I think about this, everything new we create, we need to be very mindful about creating maximum variation because this will be part of the whole. And after that, all of the available homes. But sometimes there's a bit debate: should all student housing be accessible, for instance? Well, it's still the case that most student housing isn't as accessible. So even though if we build everything new fully accessible, then it's not the whole. Not all student housing is still accessible. But I think that the us and them, and moving from us and them to a variation kind of way of thinking, I think that's something that I find helpful also in ICT, for instance. Well, it isn't tied to a separate particular design field as such.
It kind of applies more generally. Have you kind of seen an improvement in architecture and kind of the way it incorporates universal design? Are you kind of seeing that perhaps in kind of Sweden or more internationally, that there is greater recognition of kind of variability and not kind of designing with the ramps and steps that you kind of showed.
It isn't moving very fast, but I think it's different in different countries. Norway, for instance, they've had universal design as part of their legislation since 1997.
Right.
So they're a bit ahead of us Swedes in that respect. There's a lot of interesting. Denmark, in my opinion, was lagging behind Sweden for a while, but now in last 5 years or so, there's just a lot of interesting things happening in Denmark, and also from a more. It doesn't always grow from a disability rights perspective. More that an understanding of that these are values that are important for all architecture, and we need to talk about it as design and architecture, not as design for disabled, for instance.
Yes.
Yeah. And in Denmark, I would say that there's an interesting process going on right now in the architecture business as a whole, rather than just those who already have bought the idea of universal design.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. That was I found that fascinating. And if you're kind of happy to hang around for a little, I'm sure there'll be some more questions a little bit later. But thank you for now, Per-Olof Hadval from Mid Sweden University.
Thank you.
Foundations Live.
There you go. And now we'll head across another seat. So to Shane, who's in Northern Ireland from the Northern Ireland Housing Executive, and who I went over to see a couple of weeks ago now at Stormont for the publication of a new guide that, get the right one on the screen. There we go. Designing homes for all, inclusive design guide to support people living with cognitive and sensory impairments. So over to you, Shane.
Yes, Paul, and thank you very much for the invite. I thoroughly enjoyed that presentation from Per-Olof. So much of it resonated with what we were trying to do, with what we produced in terms of our guide. I was really interested in your question because it was a question I would have asked about. Have you thought, how would you apply those principles in terms of home design, which is really what we've tried to do through the development of our guide. And I suppose it's titled Designing Homes for All. We refer to inclusive design, and we call it an inclusive design guide, which is really focusing on supporting people with cognitive and sensory impairment. And I'll talk about the reasons why we have focused on that here in Northern Ireland. My role, actually, I'm a head of housing and health. So I'm actually jointly employed by the Department of Health and the Housing Executive. The Housing Executive is the Strategic Housing Authority here in Northern Ireland. So a good part of my role has been looking at policy, strategy, and how housing and health interface in the delivery of housing solutions for people with disabilities, really. So this work, really, our guide evolved from a previous review with things. The wheels of industry don't move as quickly as you would like sometimes, but there was a review of interdepartmental review of housing adaptations carried out 10 years ago, believe it or not, in Northern Ireland by both departments, the Department for Communities, who have responsibility for housing, and the Department of Health. And one of the recommendations that sat within that review highlighted that we needed to develop new areas of disability design to complement adaptations design communications toolkit and to inform new build design guidance, design for the mind, design for sight loss. Because what we're reasonably good at, I have to say, in Northern Ireland is we have quite good guidance around accessibility, which probably all regions have, in terms of ramps, doorways, corridors, room sizes, those sort of basic accessibility features that we're all familiar with. And as an occupational therapist over many years, I have been involved in making recommendations primarily for adaptations, but also involved in new build home design for accessibility. But we recognized that we weren't so good at, in fact, we were quite poor at looking at the design needs of people, and and that variation that Per Olaf talked about, and the usability element around people with behaviors, cognitive sensory impairment, because some of the biggest challenges, in fact, the majority of our biggest challenges in finding appropriate housing solutions in Northern Ireland at the moment are for people with behaviors. People with mobility impairment are relatively straightforward in terms of finding a solution, but people with behaviors and behaviors that are impacted by the environment that they're being cared for are way more challenging in finding solutions. So we knew there was work to be done in terms of what those properties needed to look like, how they should be designed, and what principles we should apply in the design of. So the guide was then endorsed by our two departments through our Accessible Homes Strategic Forum. And so it got a high level endorsement where our two departments are saying, yeah, we acknowledge we need to do this, go forth and put something together. So myself and two architects, one of them a specialist architect in design for the mind, works with the Global Brain Institute, and myself, and a small working group of a number of people, started work on this probably two and a half years ago, and something I thought would take 6 months has taken as long as it has for all sorts of different reasons. But what our guide seeks to do, and the aims, and I think it's important for me to say from the outset that it's not a regulatory document at all. We have building regulations here that obviously sort of underpin the need to comply with regulations which are legally binding. But this document is not that. It's really our first step at aspiring to ensure that the home environment is designed to promote the safety, comfort, independence, and general well-being of all the occupants. So that sort of approach that Per Olaf has talked about, to provide a reference for anyone involved in the home design process. So if I'm being honest, as an occupational therapist, my primary target was architects and designers in terms of helping to get in there at the design stage and build the principles in and get them thinking in a way around how do I make this usable for all, particularly those with cognitive and sensory impairment, and looking at the usability of the home. And I'm interested in that language was used in Per Olaf's presentation as well. And also to look at how we could change attitudes towards inclusivity and how we build or adapt our homes. And I keep going back, this was about homes, but I'll extend that what in terms of where we hope to go with it, and promoting that designing homes for all approach to the building of adaptations and homes across Northern Ireland, and to raise awareness, actually just to get it out there, raise the profile and raise awareness amongst a range of people. And I'll talk about who the target audience are, because we wanted to encourage those who are involved in housing design and construction. So our architects, our designers, our builders, our technical staff, to consider the principles that underpin the document. We also wanted to support people with cognitive and sensory impairment, along with their families and carers, to make their own informed choices, because sometimes people just step outside of statutory provision and want to go forward and do it themselves, or they could be means tested out of it. They haven't got they have the financial means, and therefore they may have to self-fund elements of the work. But to give them a better understanding as to what they might want to consider if they are considering their design. And then, bit aspirational, but we've already started the conversation in the hope that we would influence the development of future amendments to our building standards and our regulations in Northern Ireland, which is likely to happen over the next few years. So we'd want our guide to help inform what that narrative and what that conversation might be. Our target audience for the guide really was our architects and designers, as I said, were really who I initially thought we really need to get in there at that stage. Interior designers, builders, contractors, occupational therapists who very often are prescribing and agreeing and endorsing the suitability of the accommodation, social workers who may work in sensory support teams, special educational needs staff, because I'm going to talk about the transferability across to other sectors, the housing executive, the housing associations who are social landlords here, The two departments, well, three departments actually. I'll not go into how the departments in Northern Ireland set up, but we wanted to focus on the home, we wanted to focus on the health, and we wanted to focus on the infrastructure. So we wanted to sort of inform and help to set strategy in terms of what the future might look like for new homes. And then, of course, people with, I shouldn't have them at the bottom of the list, but of course, people with disabilities and their families who are considering making changes to their home. So our consultation was extensive, probably why it took as long as it did to get to a point. So we had a number of, I'm not going to go through them all, architects, user groups, carers groups, disability forums, etc. So we did engage quite extensively in terms of what the content would be. And basically what's in the guide is we've an introduction section, and this is a whistle-stop tour, so I'll give you the headlines. We've a introduction and background section where we talk about inclusive design and what we mean by that. We talk what our aims and objectives of the document. We talk about types of disability and the impact of those different types of physical, your sensory, your cognitive. We talked about the need for it, the benefit of it. And again, this is for education and awareness purposes. The barriers to it in terms of, when we do meet barriers from builders, designers, architects around, why you can't do it. So we wanted to address that and look at how we can integrate it into project delivery, and also to talk about the importance of home, which we sometimes forget. And I know certainly in the work that I do, staff are very, sometimes, particularly housing staff, can be very fixated on the systems and processes. And then as a consequence, we lose sight of, well, why are we actually doing it? This is someone's home. Let's try to walk in their shoes, so to speak, and try to get an understanding from their perspective as the importance of home, and try to embed that in our thinking at an early stage. So section 2 then goes on. We talk about key design foundations, and we've extensively researched this. There is an extensive reference section. If you don't get anything else from the guide, there's a very extensive reference section which will signpost you and direct you to a lot of the stuff that we looked at, a lot of the stuff that we reference and we saw as good practice. So if you were interested in a project, it would help to take you in a direction and find documents that you might find, or papers that you might find useful. So we then talked about in our key design foundations, and there were 3: optimizing that sensory load, delivering relevant information without overloading the senses. So we really wanted to simplify home design, not make it overly complex. And I think sometimes, I certainly see it in public spaces a lot, where architects, I think, have over-designed in terms focusing on the aesthetic, and as a consequence of that, maybe haven't thought through the principles. We see a lot of large glass fronted buildings now which create an awful lot of glare, and we talk in the guide about the impact of glare on people with sensory impairment and their wayfinding and their navigation and all of that. So we really focused in on simplifying the design. It doesn't have to be complex, it doesn't have to be complicated, and ultimately doesn't have to be expensive. We then talked about reducing design complexity, the visual access, so that allowing people to easily identify where they are, for helping for navigation. And the homes should be set up in such a way that people know where they are. It's easy to find their living space. It's easy to find the habitable rooms, the bathroom, the kitchen, the bedroom, etc. And the final key design foundation was that access to nature. And we're all very familiar with the restorative and therapeutic benefits. I think post-COVID, we've all understood that probably more than we did pre-COVID, about the importance of outdoor space. So we make reference to that as a key design foundation, that people can easily get out of the property, they can easily access public spaces, they can easily access their gardens, etc. So those are the key foundations that underpin the document. And they're further developed through what we call the inclusive design principles. And there's 12 of them. And I firmly believe, and we firmly believe, that these are principles that are transferable across sectors. So we're starting to have conversations with our education sector. We're starting to have conversations with our health estates, who are responsible for the design and build of new healthcare facilities, primary care facilities, GP practices, hospitals, etc., about how the principles could be embedded in future design of those type of builds. Schools, we know there can be huge issues for children with sensory impairment in schools that are overloading the senses in terms of how they're designed, how they're laid out, etc. So we really want to try and transfer some of, whilst our focus is on the home, look at how it could be developed elsewhere. So the design principles, in the interest of time, in the 15 minutes that we have, you'll see they're set out: safe environment, privacy, dignity, and independence, optimum levels of stimuli so that people can maximize their independence, optimum levels of light and contrast, and there's an extensive piece around light and the need for contrast and tonal contrast, and that helps with wayfinding navigation. Non-institutional and human scale environment, so not making it clinical in terms of how it's designed. Supporting orientation, so helping people find their way around, wayfinding and navigation, good visibility and visual access, access to nature, as we talked about in the foundations, promoting engagement with the family and the wider community, promoting physical and meaningful activities, and that supporting of healthy nutrition and hydration. You know, if people can't access their kitchen and they can't find their way around it, then they're less likely to use it. So we focus in on that in terms of our principles. And then what we do is then we take people from the outside in, if you like. So we start by looking at how the principles that we've just talked about can be applied in practice. So we start with the home location and the surrounding environment. We then look at the external access, so the to the property, looking at, okay, now we're in the house, how do we get around? How do we get to the rooms that we need to get to? So internal access and circulation. And then looking at the fixtures, fittings, and the decor within the room, your floors, your walls, your toilets, etc., and what you might want to consider in those. And then there's quite a bit in all of those. And then the last section looks at room layout design. So we really focus in on the most commonly, frequently used rooms or spaces, or the habitable rooms as we sometimes refer to them. So we look at the living room, kitchen, the dining room, the toilet and bathroom, and the bedrooms, which are the key spaces. And the guide then looks at a number of areas that are worth consideration and gives some hints and tips as to what you might want to consider around the character of the room, the location, the space, the view out, the daylight. We all know the importance of daylight in terms of our circadian rhythms and all of that. Looking at connection, storage, artificial lighting, I go on and on. I'll not go through them all. Because it looks a bit like that. We show living rooms, and then the architect has developed some good design tips as to the location of fixtures and fittings, looking at the space circulation, looking at views out of the room, from the bedroom, from the living room. I can use a perfect example in my own experience. My brother-in-law is a wheelchair user, and he's also got a learning disability. And he's in care at the moment. He had to go into care. It's very complex in terms of his needs, but they moved his room, and they moved him to a room for genuine reasons. There was nothing, there was no intent in terms of what happened, but they moved him to a room that he couldn't see out the window. And very quickly that manifested itself in his behaviors. He became some difficulty communicating. If you know him, you can understand him, but if you can't, then that portrays itself in his behaviors, and his behaviors deteriorated over the 2 to 3 weeks when he was moved room, and we quickly established he can't see out anymore. So the environment actually changed his behavior. He couldn't see out to the street. He loved to watch what was going on around him. They moved him to what they thought was a bigger room, they thought was a nicer room, but he couldn't see out of it. So we quickly had to revert back and think, no, we need to rethink this. So that really opened my eyes to the importance of space, to the importance of design, to the importance of views, to the importance of seeing what's going on, and all of that. And I was able to apply the principles and say, well, look, here's the problem. We can now see that is why the behaviors have manifested, because the environment has impacted on that. So I know the 15 minutes, that is a whistle-stop tour. Our next steps really, and where we're at, is we did have a formal launch of the guide at the Lawn Gallery, which I have to thank Paul and Foundations, who were one of the sponsors of the document, a very kind sponsor. So we launched it at our Parliament buildings 2 weeks ago with 2 ministers. So we had a joint ministerial launch from the Department for Communities and the Department of Health. So it's got a profile, it's raised the profile. Our plan now is to do education and awareness sessions across the sectors. In autumn time, summer's not great for capturing the audiences, as you will know. So we're really targeting the autumn time to do more awareness sessions on the content of the guide, the embedding of the principles with our technical staff, our architects, designers, etc. We're wanting to, and have already started to engage with other departments, such as education and health estates. The document is now available on the DOH and the websites, and Paul has kindly offered to host it on the Foundations, where it will be available to print. If you're like myself and you like to print stuff off and you're still a bit old school and liking paper and liking to flick through and look, then Paul has kindly offered to host that on Foundation. So I will be sending a copy to Paul soon to put that up. So if people want to avail of that, they'll be able to do so. So Paul, I am conscious that is a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but I'm hoping it gives you a sense of what's in the guide. Obviously, there's a lot in it. You would need to read it, review it, reflect on it, and I'm sure have comments. I have to say, our biggest challenge was finding images. It was very difficult to find good design examples, imagery. So when you look around, and people think, well, we're doing that already. But when you actually look at what they're doing, well, are you really? So our biggest challenge was finding the pictures and the images, because we didn't want it to be too text heavy. I have to say, I don't think even now we're still happy with the images, but we just had to go with what we had, because like everything, we would keep changing and keep changing without ever finishing. So I'm hoping, Paul, that gives you a sense, and the audience a sense of what we've tried to do here.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Shane. And I think it's written, isn't it, from kind of developing and designing new homes, but a lot of the principles apply to adapting homes as well. And as I said, when I came out, I think kind of particularly the section around kind of color contrast and kind of having different colored walls and floors and kind of equipment in a bathroom is, I think the section on that is really powerful and really makes the point that I suppose kind of things we talked about Saturday in terms of aesthetic and function, and that they're not necessarily mutually exclusive, are they? That quite often we design bathrooms in particular that have white tiles, white sanitary ware, white grab rails, white shower curtains, and for anybody with a kind of cognitive or sensory impairment, it can be then really difficult to work out what's what in the room. And even that, and it's not even particularly a cost saving, is it? It's just kind of, I suppose, kind of poor design. At the end of the day, it's not it's not functioning from a kind of cognitive and sensory perspective, even if it's working from a kind of accessible and kind of physical perspective.
Yeah, no, exactly that. And we are looking at it within adaptations and trying to ensure that our schedule of rates and all of that reflect a bit of flexibility. And I think, again, it's a phrase that Per Olaf used a lot, and that's what we're trying to achieve, that there is a greater degree of flexibility in what people can access, even through the DFG, even through adaptation, that it doesn't have to be white tiles. You can pick a different tile. You can pick alternative flooring. We can look at the fixtures and the fittings and the color of the toilet seat and all of those things that might help to make it a more usable space for the individual.
Exactly. Thank you, Shane. I'll come back to you at the end in case there are any further questions, but brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Right.
Foundations Live.
Right. Last but not least, let me welcome Michael. Hi, Michael from NHS, Leicester NHS University Trust. I might have got those words in the wrong order, but Michael's very passionate about universal design and accessibility. So that'd be really useful to get Michael to come and speak to us today and give his perspective. So yeah, over to you, Michael.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to come and speak with you guys today. Apologies that the camera is not the greatest. I'm just on a mobile device because the laptop has decided it doesn't like the heat. So I think we've had two really fantastic presentations this afternoon that really kind of capture the elements and, you know, the key features of universal design. So I don't really want to kind of re-go over that, but what I did want to talk about briefly, because I'm aware of time, the impact that universal design can have on individuals. I am somebody with albinism. I'm registered severely sight impaired, and I'm acutely aware that my impairment isn't my disability. I become disabled when environments aren't able to mitigate some of the barriers I face in those environments. For example, we've spoke about this afternoon, you know, lots of new buildings are now appearing with really nice big glass fronts, and aesthetically they look really, really great. But for somebody like me, the consequence on my impairment then is that it's significantly worse or significantly more challenging, due to, you know, my diagnosis hasn't changed. Nothing about me's changed on that day. The only thing that has changed is the environment that I'm entering or the environment that I'm subject to. I'm a huge believer that disability isn't a diagnosis. Disability is an interaction between the impairment that we have, the environments, the relationships, and the systems that we interact with on a daily basis. So I think that when we get universal design right, you know, that doesn't change a person's diagnosis or impairment, but what it does do is it allows their experience of that impairment or diagnosis to be considerably different because they're in an environment that supports that they're in an environment that's supportive of what they need. And lots of the things that, you know, we do retrospectively now, you know, to try and make environments more accessible. If we, you know, if we consider those factors in the design element, like we've alluded to, and, you know, we look at accessibility and usability, and I think they're really two really important distinctions, because you can have accessibility, but the experience of that accessibility is as important as the ability to be able to access it. In a similar way that, you know, having access at one end but not at the other creates additional barriers. We may have a ramp for a wheelchair user, but if all the signs are in a language that is not readable, or, you know, the signs are not accessible to the wheelchair user, then the ramp is completely irrelevant, because accessing the ramp has an additional barrier. So I think the key thing for me and my biggest passion is understanding that a lot of the barriers and environments that people face are created by the society that we live in, and ultimately created by the inability to design with human variation in mind. When you consider specifically in the UK that 1 in 4 people live with an impairment, that's 25% of the population. Designing with 25% of the population in mind is as important as designing with the other 75% of the population in mind. And that's people living with impairments. But I think the luxury with universal design is it stands to benefit the majority of people. If our universal design caters for height and size and various other things, the group of people that stand to benefit, considerably increases. And I think that's one thing about universal design, inclusion, accessibility. We may start out with the intent of improving a specific area or environment, system or process for one group of people, but actually as a consequence of that, lots more people find that service much more accessible. So I think the key thing for me, to leave everyone with today, because we've had, two fantastic presentations that kind of talk about the principles of universal design. I think the key thing for me is, to consider in your both your personal and your professional lives that, how disabling is the environments that you work in, that you commute in, and think about that on, you know, various different levels. People with mobility needs, people with sensory impairments, various different needs. Just take a moment to think: are there anything that you can identify in that environment that may make this environment either more enabling or more disabling? Because like I say, I do believe that disability isn't simply a diagnosis; it's an interaction between the impairment and the society, systems, relationships, and people that we interact with daily. So I don't want to kind of revisit the two previous speakers, but I would be, you know, very, very interested in looking at the guide that's been created in Northern Ireland. It sounds like, you know, a really valuable guide, and I think, you know, it contextualizes something that can seem quite abstract. And I think that that's a huge barrier to universal design. It seems very abstract, it seems very nuanced, and actually, when we break it down to people, it becomes a lot more manageable, and very few people will disagree with the concepts of universal design. Completely agree with both of the speakers. You know, we've definitely not made as much progress that we should have, and there are absolutely societies, you know, demonstrating significantly better universal design capabilities. However, I think that we have a really unique opportunity as we accelerate into a world of AI and robotics and different ways of working and different ways of designing. This is the opportunity now that, rather than thinking retrospectively, we can start to build all of these principles in. And, you know, it's super important that we do this at this time, because as we do go AI and more digital, we know that digital exclusion is a huge thing for a lot of people. And if we create environments, systems, or spaces that solely exist online and exclude huge numbers of people, then, you know, the future is looking a little bit darker than the present. So I think everybody that's, you know, obviously turned up to this call today and wanted to, you know, listen to the speakers speak, and it's obviously be taking things back to their own teams. It's just about continuing that snowball effect, you know, sharing the concepts of universal design, you know, educating and highlighting when we do identify things that may be potential barriers, being an advocate and a voice for universal design in your own personal lives and businesses. All of these things collectively will start to galvanize and create the momentum that we really, really need. We know currently 1 in 4 people live with a, you know, impairment, neurodivergence, or long-term health condition. We also know simultaneously that the amounts of people waiting for neurodivergent testing and for various other things is absolutely huge. So this part of human variation is, you know, it has always been around, and it will continue to always be around. We now have a real obligation to start trying to create the society that we all want to live in. One final thing: 80% of people living in the United Kingdom at the moment acquire their disability at some point in life. So, you know, not only is impairment not static, but neither is the atypical norm. Becoming disabled is one of the only protected characteristics that you can join at any point. And also, having becoming disabled doesn't discriminate against anyone or anything. It can happen to anyone at any point. So just because this isn't our reality today or our reality tomorrow, it absolutely doesn't mean that it won't be our reality in the not too distant future for either ourselves, a loved one, or other people that we care about. So again, thank you for allowing me to come and share a little bit of my experience and why universal design is so important to me. Thank you to the other two speakers, because it's been fascinating listening to perspectives from different areas, and, you know, different ways of looking and how different people are at different points in their journey. Really, really interesting to, you know, see the comparison from Sweden to some of the neighbours, and, you know, understanding that, you know, universal design has been in some societies since, you know, the 90s, is all super important. So there's a lot to unpick, but I think the intent to create a more equitable experience for everybody is the ultimate goal. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Michael. I'll bring back Per Olaf and Shane as well. I think kind of one of the things that came out across the this afternoon was that it kind of the importance of kind of culture and having examples of kind of universal design or better design to share with people. And you kind of mentioned, Shane, that find it really difficult to get more examples. And I guess it's perhaps kind of the snowball effect, that the more examples you see, the more examples you get, the more examples you see, and then the more examples you'll get. I mean, do any of you have any thoughts on kind of how we can start kicking that snowball down the hill a little bit quicker, or kind of any areas where universal design is kind of further ahead than others? And I've kind of seen kind of Ford Focus cars kind of being kind of proclaimed as one of the better examples of universal design. But have any of you got any thoughts on kind of how we can kind of accelerate progress?
Well, I'm happy to come in first on that, Paul. I think one of our primary aims, and if we achieve little else, if we've even raised awareness, and what we've also done, and I should have said in the presentation, we consulted and engaged with the School of Architecture in Northern Ireland. So Queen's University is the School of Architecture, and we had one of the chief architects involved with us who had a child, as it so happens, with autism. He'll not mind me disclosing that. And he has assured us that he's going to start to embed and look at embedding the principles in the architectural teaching. And I think that's the starting point. I think it's getting that embedded and raising that awareness and getting people to start thinking about inclusive design features or universal design features at the earliest stage. So we think that's a positive step, because at the moment it's not really in there. We're still quite focused on the physical features. So I suppose that's one of the ways we've aimed to try and get the awareness out there with the people that really can embed the principles in what we do, because it's it's more difficult to do after the event, because that always comes with a cost, and at the moment we're in extremely financially challenging times here in Northern Ireland, so we need to get it right now so that we don't have to go back and adapt and fund and do all of that. So that would be one of the ideas that we have here.
Yeah, I mean, I always kind of think supermarkets are pretty universally designed, but that's probably more for the shopping trolley more than anything else, I guess. But kind of parallel in terms of examples maybe from other sectors, are there kind of lessons that we can learn from other areas and how they've developed their approaches, do you think?
I think sorry, I'll let you go.
Michael, please go ahead.
Yeah, no. So I think it's something that we've all touched on. Finding really good examples of universal design at the moment are quite few and far between. And I think what is probably a lot more easy to do, which will then generate the conversations around how we create universal design, is start to identify those familiar barriers that people face in different environments. Once you identify the barriers that are continuously barriers, you then start to identify the gaps for where universal design may have the most impact. So although sometimes it's difficult to see great examples of universal design, I think that's probably because we're looking for the end goal. And sometimes before we're able to reach the end goal, we need to understand the barriers that people face continuously every day. So I think a lot of the conversation that will drive some of the most nuanced universal design features will be from exactly that, identifying whether that's at an individual level, the barriers that an individual faces, in their home environment or in their school environment, or whatever environment it may be. I think once we understand the barriers that either the individual faces on a repetitive basis, or a cohort of people may face repetitively, I think that's where we get to a place where we start to see resolutions that align to the principles of universal design. And I think where we've historically gone wrong with that is we've identified a barrier, we've looked at creating a solution, and we haven't applied the 3 principles of universal design to the solution that we're creating. So the solution is implemented, it removes the barrier for that one group of people or that one individual. But as a consequence of that, we've now excluded another 2-3 groups of people unintentionally because we didn't apply the design principles to the initial solution we were trying to reach, if that makes sense.
Yes, yeah, very much so, Michael, very much so. And Per Olaf, in your
Well, first of all, I would add to what Shane said. I think we need to. When I teach design students universal design, they are very. My experience is that they are very eager to go there if we just allow them the opportunity to think about their roles as future designers and the connection between design and how design can both open up opportunities but also close and create barriers. And they haven't had that many chances before they come to university to think about design and diversity and how that's all related. So I think that and the generations that are growing up now, they are much more non-critical, I would say, and they are more used to thinking. Well, they've grown up with more inclusive teaching, etc. So that the way they've grown up and they discuss meat consumption norms and they discuss and that's my experience that the generations that grow up now are much more norm critical. So we need to sort of allow those discussions to bubble up. And as I said, the students themselves, they are eager to go there and to discuss human difference and the consequences of that. But then I also had a look at the guide, Shane, and I really enjoyed the reference section, but also that you in your presentation that you highlighted usability as well. There was a time around year 2000 when there was a term called universal usability, and where it sort of was heading in that direction. For one reason or the other, we've sort of lost track of the term usability in Sweden, at least in the built environment. We say that every new build that we have, even in our legislation, that buildings and homes and public squares, etc., should be accessible and usable. But then it's mainly accessibility we define. We don't define usability very well. And I think maybe, what about if it's the other way around? Because what's usable is often also accessible. And now Michael has, we've lost Michael, but he ended with equitable experiences. And so I think the individual's perspective and usability, and that I think that's something that where I think we can put more effort into to highlight the importance of usability. In the IT field, usability has always been at the forefront, and the growth of the field, the user experience field, the UX field. But that has been mainly taken place in the digital realm and not as much outside of that.
Great, thank you. I think that's a nice positive way to end that. Yeah, kind of next generation will be much better at it than we've been, I guess. So thank you both, and thank you to Michael as well. I think it's been a really interesting session this afternoon. So I hope everybody's got a lot from it. I know Per Olaf will be at the Universal Design Conference in Galway in November. Yes.
Looking forward to
that. Shane's guide is available as PDF, and we'll have it as a physical copy very soon. So thank you all for joining us this afternoon.
Foundations Live.
Right. I enjoy that today. It's lots of really useful food for thought, I think, and some kind of practical guidance in terms of where we go next. So thank you to all of our speakers today for joining us. We've got a few things coming up. So our next Foundations Live will be on the 17th of July, when we've got a special looking at motor neuron disease and how you can deliver home adaptations quicker. So we're going to be joined by the Motor Neuron Disease Association, a couple of local authorities, and a supplier of kind of flat pack extensions that can be done really quickly. And we've also got a session on kitchen design, which is on the 18th of August. So those will be coming up fairly soon. And then in the autumn, we'll be returning with the DFG Champions Roadshows. Dates will be published very, very shortly. But one of the sessions that we're looking to host during the roadshows, so one of the sessions we'll be looking at bathroom design. So I think kind of a lot of things you've heard today and some of the content from the Northern Ireland Guide, well, will definitely feature in that session on bathroom design. And we're having a session on how to do DFGs quicker. As I kind of mentioned earlier, government are looking at underspend. So if you can do adaptations quicker, then obviously that decreases the risk of any underspend. So we're going to do a session on underspends. If you've got something that you think would be useful, interesting for the people in the sector to hear about, then please do get in touch. We're always looking for people to come and speak and share their expertise at those roadshows. So I think that's all for today. I will, as usual, finish off with a song, and this is the plea for you to come and speak at the next round of roadshows. So until next time, thank you all for joining us. Go and have a cold shower or something, and we'll see you again soon.
Everyone's got a story to tell, a lesson learned, a moment you know so well. Don't keep it hidden, don't lock it away. The world needs your voice today. Step on up, don't be afraid. Every word is a path you've made. Come and speak if you wanna hear. Come and speak. Voice. Come and speak us out. Show us now. Come and speak and tell the world what you're all about. You've got wisdom, you've got fire inside. What you discover could change someone's life. It's not about perfect, it's not about fame, it's about lifting up every name.